Chapter 73 to 75. After Rei and Conan left IWA, Mizukage was grumbling about the timing of the boy's rampage. He looked at the still struggling form of the boy who was supposed to be his nephew and with a sigh, he chopped the boy's neck, making him fall unconscious. As Onoki was waving his hand around, to suit the burn the contact with Gobi's chakra caused, he could with the corner of his eye see some IWA shinobi approach him. He sighed again as he saw them look around with downcast gazes when they saw the destruction the boy caused. And it started as such a nice and calm day. He muttered to himself. Standing up, he decided it was time to give some orders to his subordinates to clean up this mess. While he was pondering about what should be done, and who would be the most suitable person for it, around 200 ninjas gathered around him. These were the ones that already dealt with the monkeys in their assigned regions, the so-called elites of IWA. Onoki straightened himself to look presentable and was about to open his mouth when the ground under him burst into a flurry of paper, swirling around him. Before he could even widen his eyes, the papers started gluing themselves to his body. Onoki could see the IWA elites slightly panic before they started reacting. It took him only a second, but his mind went through his entire jutsu repertoire, looking for any jutsu that could save him. In the end, he went for a simple but quick solution and toughened his skin with earth release, awaiting an explosion. Inwardly, he was freaking out and praying the explosive tags are of low quality so he would not incur too much damage through his rock skin jutsu. Then, a loud boom resounded and the surroundings were covered in smoke, in pink smoke. When the smoke cleared, all elites of IWA could see Old Man Onoki, the most stubborn ninja out of all rock-headed IWA ninjas, the feared dust release user, the fence-sitter, clad in a pink tutu covered in pink glitters while he sported a heavy amount of makeup on his face. To add salt into the injury, in front of him, on the ground, was a message. This is punishment for not showing me Keki Tota, midget. Onoki stared with dead eyes forward, as he realized the situation he was currently in. His lips slowly started twisting into a frown as the vein on his forehead started pulsing. The old man burst into loud shouts, "Shut up!" He rubbed his arm on his face to get rid of the makeup, only to make a red smudge on his face from the lipstick. The surrounding ninja started laughing at his predicament, which prompted Onoki to scream even louder in his fit of rage until his back suddenly experienced a sharp surge of pain, making his eyes go wide while he dropped on his knees. Am I perhaps too old for this shit? He mumbled in bewilderment, leaning forward as he held his back. This was the start of Onoki's back problems. 2 days later, after Rei, Conan, and Tsunade went through their rightful loot, the trio was sitting in the capital of the Land of Water, in Berry Company's headquarters, served tea by Kurobo, who was requested by Rei for a meeting. Rei wasn't amused by his last mission. No, he was going in kind of blind and had no information he could use. That's why he was here now instead of reporting the success to the Mizukage. Yesterday he threw a scroll containing the daughter of the noble who hired them to him, with words the mission is done. In hindsight, he probably should have unsealed her but, meh. The bastard plotted against Rei and Conan and if he succeeded, both would be dead so a bit of inconvenience is the least he could expect in return. You want me to do what again? Kurobo asked pointedly in disbelief after he heard what Rei just told him. He couldn't believe his ears. You heard right. Rei nodded. I want you to pick trustworthy employees and make them gather intelligence for me. The company is almost in every country now. It is widespread with a good reach in high places. Our merchants usually know the right people to pull this off and I know you did what I asked and mostly recruited in slums. These people will be grateful enough to do this for us. As Kurobo heard Rei, he suddenly stilled, realization sneaking into his mind. You planned this from the start. He declared, not an ounce of doubt in his voice. That's why you made me employ the poor. We gave them a home when they needed it the most. There are a lot of people willing to go quite far for the company and those that became traitors are the cream of the crop out of them. The most capable. Kurobo gulped with wide eyes. I see. They were put for that 2-month-long intelligence training regime not to safeguard the company's secrets but for this. Rei nodded. He thought quite a lot about how to make a spy network. But he didn't want to inconvenience himself. Taking care of such a network can go only in 2 ways. Sasori style or Jiraiya style. Sasori used manipulations and held something important against his spies so they won't betray him and will continue doing the job for him. He went even as far as using mind alteration in quite a clever way. Rei could do this. He was much better with seals than Sasori. The problem was, he would need a long time to find informants and put seals on them or find good blackmail to keep them in their places. Jiraiya on the other hand, is spending quite a lot of his time managing his network. He has to be constantly aware and visit his informants quite frequently. In short, he is extremely busy. That was a no-go for Rei as he would rather spend the time with Conan and Tsunade, rather than follow Jiraiya's example. It was only after reading a yearly report on Bairi Company that he found out he had a perfect candidate for the spy network right under his nose. No matter how much he now tries to say recruiting the poor was for this goal, he just ordered Kurobo to do this because he believed this way, the employees will be more loyal. Never did he think it would end up with them becoming spies for him. But would he actually admit he was not planning it from the start to Kurobo? Of course, he would not. Yes, I naturally planned it all ahead. Ahahaha. Rei confidently stated with totally honest laughter that made Konan roll her eyes at him, and Tsunade almost did spit take as she drank tea when she heard how shameless he was currently being before starting to choke. Rei just ignored the two women sitting around him and focused on Kurobo, who was awkwardly trying not to avert his gaze from Rei. Here, Rei pulled a few tags from his pocket. The new clones of mine that I gave you to produce the energy source seals can also produce these. It's a special communication tag that can cover large distances. Rei started only to be interrupted by Kurobo, who had a shrewd look on his face, instantly forming a plan on how to use this for trading. Rei just gave him a helpless look but answered. You can talk with somebody in Suna even from here. The land of water is actually in a very nice location. We are in the so-called center of the known world. How the country still didn't manage to become a trading superpower with this kind of advantage will be forever a mystery for me, but at least we, the Bairi Company, can use that. You will make the company branch out to become the leader in trading in the world. I expect this to be done in 3 years, Rei told Kurobo, who nodded seriously. 3 years was a tight schedule for such a goal, but it was doable. Especially with all the influence the company had right now. And while doing so, you will slowly build up the spy network from the loyal people. Choose the most loyal and capable employee to manage it. Don't do it yourself. That would be too obvious. This tag, Rei gave him one special tag that was colored differently. Can reach only its pair tag that I have on me, so it is something akin to a safe channel. This will be in the hands of the manager of the network. Kurobo nodded in understanding. While he wasn't overjoyed at the prospect of having to spy on people with his traders, he was indeed interested in the idea of making Bairi the #1 trading company in the world. Compromises had to be done, he guessed. After all, Rei was the owner, so no matter that it was he who built the company up. There was only one reaction to that. It will be done. Kurobo said confidently. The following hours were spent in discussion about how to exactly implement the network and how to make the Bairi company the best in the world. Rei was really hoping he would one day become someone who could manipulate various villages from the shadows through the economy. After all, in this world, these supernatural fighters were still under the thumb of fat bald men called daimyo who spent most of their time screwing this or that maid. Why? Because these men had money. Even though ninjas could easily take the money from them, it was plainly said, a different mentality. A mentality that was quite easy to use if one knew what strings to pull. Rei and Mizukage silently stared at each other while the atmosphere in the room thickened by the second. The Mizukage's piercing stare didn't waver even for a second, but Rei was not much different. Both had that impassive touch in their posture that made the ANBU in the room gulp and stay quiet while with great anticipation, wait for what happens next. Suddenly Konan cutely sneezed. And the atmosphere was instantly broken. The 4 ANBU even forgot to keep the flow of their chakra and face faulted to the ground from the ceiling. The Mizukage blinked at that and Rei smirked in a victory which made the man scoff before giving a pointed glare to his ANBU, who quickly scurried away from the office. He then turned back to Rei and sighed before starting to talk. So, let's start. Somehow, without Rei nor Konan noticing, the man actually managed to draw his trusty pipe and started de-stressing. Let's see, you were on a mission to retrieve the daughter of Mr. Hasuda Waramika, who by the way, gave you a 5-star, should be fired review after you left him with a scroll that contained his daughter. He puffed out a bit of smoke while narrowing his eyes at Rei. After a while, Mizukage continued. Not that it matters. Yeah, that was an ingenious way to deliver a hostage, wasn't it? Rei nodded happily. The Mizukage wisely decided to ignore the remark and continued. Moving on. You were away barely for 2 weeks. He stopped for a moment and raised his head from the documents to give Rei an incredulous look of exasperated conflict. You left in the direction of Iwagakure. He ever so slowly continued, emphasizing every word. As he again grew quiet and observed Rei, he saw him and Konan look at him in confusion and almost let out a long whine. Look. The Mizukage put his pipe on the table and tiredly rubbed the bridge of his nose. During these 2 weeks of your absence from the village, someone. He looked from Rei to Konan and back before continuing, almost leveled Amigakure with meteorites. As he said it, his eyes watched the duo as a hawk. Konan was her usual completely stoic self, which, he had no idea what it meant. But Rei was confused. That was good. That meant they had nothing to do with it. The Mizukage released a sigh of relief and threw this incident behind, a bit happier that this wasn't the work of his notorious duo. He again looked at the documents on his table and his mood again soured. 1 resolved, 2 to go. His lips twitched as he saw the next incident. The mansion you were supposed to secretly and discreetly infiltrate and secure the daughter of Mr. Hanasawarukaku. Ray interrupted him and tilted his head. Wasn't it Hadasawamakura before? He nevertheless politely quieted himself as the Mizukage decided to give him his pointed, I am so disappointed look that was a telling sign of a leader. Anyway, the Mizukage continued. Mr. Ha. The Mizukage stopped and blinked before his eyes again narrowed at sheepish Ray, who realized his topic change no jutsu didn't work. You were supposed to secure the daughter of the noble who requested you. Could you explain why I got reports of trees unceasingly raining from the sky? Mizukage asked calmly. Ray didn't answer and just turned to Conan with mock confusion on his face, to which the Mizukage barely held himself from scowling. Conan just tilted her head, her face still in stoic cold and impassive expression. She nodded to Ray and turned to Mizukage before speaking. The AIM experienced a meteor shower and IWA tree rain. Seriously, the weather these 2 weeks was just so inscrutable. She uttered almost boredly. The Mizukage had no idea how to interpret that. So, you are acknowledging it was you? He asked with an incredulous look, to which Conan shook her head. I just think you should probably think of countermeasures to unfathomable weather changes. Who knows when fishes decide to rain from the sky? Conan said with such seriousness on her face that Ray had to avert his gaze and grit his teeth to hold back his snicker. Even then, he was forced to put his hand in front of his lips to cover it. At that, the Mizukage exasperatedly sighed. He long ago realized there is just no reading Conan's expressions or body language. She was just stoic and that was it. Was this her open threat to Kirigikure? To him? Or was she actually really serious in saying that? He was utterly lost and had no idea. The only thing he could do was give a stink eye to Ray. Yes. Let's focus on Ray. Nobody is threatening to exterminate your village with fish rain. Happy thoughts. He reminded himself. Look, Ray. I know it was a trap, all right. But... The Mizukage again lowered his head to the documents. The facts, more than 100 of samurai are dead. At least 30 shinobi died there too. He said with a conflicted expression. To each other, no less. IWA samurai and ninja slaughtered each other. His lips curled into a smirk which he instantly forced to disappear from his face. And worst of all, you utterly frightened Kuroa noble household of Iwagakure while destroying the right wing of their mansion. He raised his head to look at Ray. Under different circumstances, I would be so proud of you right now. But the problem is that due to Mr. Hawarawatch's name, the upper echelons of IWA know it was the work of Kirigikure's ninjas. He finished, making Ray scratch his cheek. And that should bother me why again? Ray asked and Conan nodded stoically, neither having a clue what this was about. Seeing that, Mizukage rubbed the bridge of his nose again. For starters, the IWA demands your head. He said, making Ray's eyes narrow. The Mizukage, to his eternal dismay, even now didn't have a clear picture of Ray's strength, but he knew he wouldn't want to fight him. He didn't dare to stall and keep Ray on his toes. But it was actually Conan who was making him shit his pants as he noted her dangerously narrowed eyes on her still stoic but somewhat rigid face. That girl loved her explosives, and watching her effortlessly dispatch the 7 swordsmen with her exploding clones while her real body was snacking on some sweets in treetops was a real eye-opener for him. No, it would be better to come out clean right at once. I, of course, declined. He reassured the duo quickly, happy that Conan's posture relaxed. And while it was utterly irritating for him, he was glad that Ray, as always, stayed relaxed through the entire time. This will however strain the relations between our 2 villages and Nashio. Just get to the point. Ray interrupted, not interested in these talks. He knew the man was just bullshitting and trying to guilt-trip them. Since when did one ninja village care what the other thought? The notion was ridiculous. If it was true, there would be no shinobi war in the past. What they did happened quite often. Sure, it's usually on a much smaller scale, but it does happen. It's not like they attacked IWA or Iwagakure. He smirked. Right. The Mizukage suddenly felt quite unsure of continuing this meeting. In short, Iwa's daimyo is not amused with the Tsuchikage due to this incident. Fortunately for us, the man is ot the reasonable sort. He wisely ignored Ray's snort. And decided to ignore the excuse of, it was Kirinin. While it is unlikely there to be some serious repercussions for Iwagakure, but the relationship between the Earth Daimyo and Iwagakure is strained. Needless to say, this destroyed any and all hopes for future alliances between our villages. The Mizukage said uncaringly. Ray just rolled his eyes as he crossed his arms. Which basically happens at least once per 2 years between all the villages due to submission. The Mizukage shrugged and continued in his pace. The last thing I want to ask you about is the attack on Iwagakure. The Mizukage shrugged and continued in his pace. The last thing I want to ask you about is the attack on Iwagakure. As he finished that sentence, silence fell on the room, all of them just waited for someone to start with impassive faces. The more the silence went on, the more disgruntled the Mizukage became as he was slowly understanding the duo, by being quiet, was saying they had nothing to do with it. But somehow that was hard for him to believe. The stunt was flashy. Too flashy to not be the work of Ray and Conan. They usually make such a blizzard that it can count as terraforming or some unforgettable spectacle. A hidden village being invaded by small monkey imitations of the third Hokage, yeah, that was exactly what he would expect from them, hence his narrowed and suspicious gaze. When the silence still didn't cease even after a while, Mizukage's eye twitched and he decided to start the conversation. So you have really nothing to say about that? He asked suspiciously, but both Ray and Conan just wordlessly shook their head in the exact same motion. A motion that screamed it was prepared beforehand. Right. He commented dryly. I heard that Mizukage got quite embarrassed. He tried another tactic. Something about being made a clown of. He inwardly hoped this would get a reaction, but to his relief, it was exactly the same as after he asked about Amigakure. Thank God. At least my ninjas are sensible enough to not invade an enemy village and go 2 versus thousands by themselves. Not to say about publicly humiliating the most stubborn old geezer with the ability to hold grudges even beyond the grave itself. He thought as his shoulders slumped in relaxation. I am sorry for doubting you. Now I can rest assured that my ninjas are not that suicidal. He sniffed and resisted a joyful tear that made Ray kinda awkward. Anyway, the Mizukage did a sudden turn in his mood. What exactly was the scroll that stored the daughter of the noble? I am not aware that living things can be stored. His eyes narrowed at Ray. Hiding one's skills was natural for a ninja, but there were exceptions. It was the village's law that any sealmaker had to register. The amount of people capable of creating even something as simple as explosive tags was alarmingly low, so for the sake of enough supply during wartime, the registration was mandatory for them. Ray inwardly frowned. He was aware of the law but didn't really care. Damn. Looks like from now on, I will have to order my clones to use henge when buying chakra ink. He thought. While it was quite suspicious that the ink sales weren't managed by the village, but after a bit of probing, he found out Kiri uses special octopuses to produce it and is one of the biggest sellers of chakra ink in the elemental nation, so there is overabundance of it. Nobody really cared for a thing they had a lot of. He smiled disarmingly at the S-rank killer who earned his high ranking with his ability as an assassin. It was time to do some damage control, so he beamingly answered. It's ingenious, isn't it, Mizukage-sama? Last time he gestured to Conan, were in the capital, we found out that Bairi Company is selling those. Ray inwardly chuckled at the sour look of the Kaga as he said this. Bairi Company. The Mizukage was aware of them. One of the more international companies originating in the land of water. A company so perfect for covert operations in other lands. And yet, he was unable to make use of them, which soured his mood every time he heard of them. Ray knew the ninja in this world wasn't only about the direct approach. No. They did plant spies in merchant companies and did various underhanded tactics through them. Even economic destabilization wasn't that far-fetched. Many skirmishes near the borders actually started because of those. And it was usually the companies that took the blame when it came to light. That's why not many international ones actually existed in the world. There were caravans, there were trading companies, but any production or innovation-oriented companies were usually focused on their own country to avoid these things. Hence, the big technological disparity of this world. Ray surmised this will be the reason for the starvation of Suna later on, as they would just have nobody to buy from despite actually having the money for buying. Once the daimyo was against you, the merchants would not want to trade with you due to fear of attracting his ire, and just like that, the village was cut from their lifelines and food supply. For a village without many merchants nigh an infertile desert, that was a disaster. To make his company avoid the fate of being forced away from the international scene due to some idiotic schemes of old senile men, Ray ordered the first big work was to introduce the electronic appliances to various daimyos. That's why when the company entered the Mizukage or any other Kage's ears, they were powerless as the company had protection of the daimyo. Ray wouldn't allow the company to fully enter a country in which they didn't have this proverbial shield. These old schemers were utterly unable to interfere with them. As time went on, the company became more and more important for various countries, bringing even more economical gains than entire hidden villages, which made them even more untouchable by the Kages and invaluable to daimyos who usually cared mostly about their own pockets. By now, the company was an internationally acknowledged neutral zone for the ninja world. That's why it was only now Ray wanted Kurobo to push for becoming number one. They just had enough clout for it right now. Ugh, this. Biribiri Company is selling those. The Mizukage scrunched his face in deep regret, not even attempting to hide it from Ray and Conan, who barely held back smirks. Nobody was aware of their status as owners of the company, and they knew why the man was so regretful. The company originated in his own country, so him being unable to make them work for him, it was a deep cut in his own pride, and it wouldn't be far from the truth to say he became a secret laughingstock of other Kages. Yes. Ray beamed, gleeful at the expression of the man. They have better storage seals with thrice the capacity of current seals of Kiri while being capable of storing and preserving even food. He exclaimed, making the Mizukage's eyes go wide, only to pale a second later when he realized they were an international company. Storing food was common, but preserving it for a long time. Something like that was unheard of. The implications. Ray didn't care about Mizukage's internal struggle and continued. Even their paper tags are cheaper but more effective than the standard ones. He said. By now, he was basically giving a sales pitch without his target even knowing it. I am sure the company will be an indispensable part of the next shinobi war. Ray trailed off, his smirk widening as Mizukage's face plainly showed his shock. Don't give me that look. It is obvious even now where the shinobi villages are heading. 10 years tops and we are in another war. Ray rolled his eyes at the sheepish leader in front of him. It was subtle. But it was obvious once one started to look deeper into what was happening in the world. The villages were gearing up. Sure, they were gearing up even in peacetime since they were basically a militaristic force, but right now, the recruitment and weaponry making was in full swing. It started with IWA and Kumo, but the others quickly caught onto them and also started doing it. Even without his foreknowledge, Ray knew it was coming. The death of the third Kazekage would be a trigger, but it was far from the real cause. Kumo and IWA wanted revenge on Konoha. Suna wasn't yet in dispute with their daimyo and wanted to get fertile lands for the Land of Wind. Konoha wanted to keep their wealth and pride of being the winner. And Kiri wanted to, whatever. Ray didn't really know what the Mizukage had in mind for the upcoming event, but he knew the man was basically preparing a stage for it. They were Kiri, so they would act like Kiri. Most likely some blitz attack of sorts. It was just so stupid. The Land of Water didn't need lands. They were an island nation and every island in its vicinity belonged to it. They didn't need to join the war on the mainland. Yet, Ray knew they would be joining and had no idea why. But the Mizukage just stubbornly stared at Ray, letting him know this topic was not something he would open right now. Ray could only sigh in exasperation as the man wasn't really denying it but was utterly refusing to be forthcoming with information. 5 years. That's how long it would take for the third war to take off. And Ray was already peeved he had to deal with that shitstorm right now. Looks like it's time to progress May's training and think about contingency plans. He hummed to himself. Well, since I am clever enough to see I am not going to get anything out of you, are we excused? Ray asked the man who nodded. He turned around, took Conan's hand, and was about to leave when he heard the last stern statement of his Kage before he closed the door. Keep it to yourself. Some things are better to be kept secret.